In the sterile conference room of Meridian Corp, a dedicated marketing director was about to face the corporate execution she never saw coming. What started as a routine Tuesday morning took a shocking turn when she came face to face with a manila folder that would destroy everything she'd built. Sarah Mitchell wasn't your typical corporate employee. For 9 years, she had spent her life climbing from intern to director through sheer determination and 60-hour weeks, known for her unwavering loyalty and ethical standards that made her colleagues trust her completely. When she encountered the words, strategic realignment, delivered with practiced corporate sympathy, she had no idea she was walking into a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of corporate power. Sarah's desperate acceptance of a mysterious consulting offer that would lead to federal crimes, family betrayal, and a choice between survival and soul. What began as a termination meeting would become a deadly game of corporate espionage and psychological manipulation. The business world would never be the same after one woman discovered that sometimes the only way to beat the system is to risk everything you have left to expose it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Mitchell's badge beeped against the turnstile at exactly 7:47 a.m., the same time it had every Tuesday for the past 9 years. The familiar rhythm of corporate routine wrapped around her like a comfortable blanket. Elevator to the 14th floor, left turn past the water cooler where Jenkins from accounting always lingered with yesterday's sports scores, straight, shot to her corner office overlooking the parking lot where her Honda Civic sat in space 247. She'd earned that corner office. Clawed her way up from intern to marketing director, one campaign at a time, one late night at a time, one sacrificed weekend at a time. The wall behind her desk displayed the evidence. Framed awards for the Morrison account, the breakthrough campaign that saved 3 jobs during the 2019 downturn, the customer satisfaction metrics that had climbed steadily under her leadership. Her coffee was still steaming when her phone buzzed. "Sarah, could you swing by conference room B? Nothing urgent." David Kim's voice carried that particular corporate casualness that meant everything except what it said. Conference room B. The glass-walled fishbowl where quarterly reviews happened, where promotions were announced, where bad news was delivered with strategic sympathy. Sarah glanced at her calendar, nothing scheduled until the Phoenix campaign review at 10. Her stomach tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the morning coffee. "Sure, David. On my way." The walk down the hallway felt longer than usual. Colleagues glanced up from their desks, offered their standard morning nods, then looked away too quickly. Later, she would remember those averted eyes and understand what they meant. But in the moment, she attributed the strange energy to her own nervousness about nothing. David sat at the far end of the conference table, his usually neat tie slightly askew. Beside him, Patricia Hernandez from HR shuffled through a manila folder with the careful attention of someone handling evidence. The sight of that folder, thick with papers, official-looking, sent ice through Sarah's veins. "Sarah, please, sit down." Patricia's voice carried the practiced sympathy of someone who had delivered this speech before, many times before. Sarah remained standing. "What's this about?" David cleared his throat, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere past her left shoulder. "Sarah, you know how much I value your contributions to this team. Your work on the Morrison account was exceptional, and the Phoenix project has really benefited from your insights." The past tense hung in the air like smoke. "However," Patricia continued seamlessly, "the company has made some strategic decisions about realignment moving forward. We're restructuring to better position ourselves for the challenges of the next fiscal quarter." Strategic decisions. Realignment. Restructuring. The words were corporate origami, folding harsh reality into acceptable shapes. Sarah's analytical mind, the same mind that had dissected market trends and consumer behavior for nearly a decade, began parsing the Euphemisms with cold precision. You're firing me. David flinched as if she'd slapped him. Sarah, it's not. You're firing me, she repeated, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her chest. After 9 years. After the Morrison account. After Phoenix. Patricia slid a packet across the table. Your severance package reflects your years of service and… how much? Sarah's practical nature surfaced through the shock like a life preserver. She needed numbers, facts, something solid to hold on to while her world shifted beneath her feet. 6 weeks' salary plus accumulated vacation time. Given the current budget constraints, 6 weeks. Sarah's mental calculator, honed by years of managing her family's finances, began its grim arithmetic. Mortgage, $2,400. Mom's medications, $800. James's tuition payment, $4,200, due in 3 weeks. Car payment, insurance, groceries, utilities. The numbers cascaded through her mind like falling dominoes. There's also information about COBRA benefits and career transition services, Patricia added, her voice growing softer as she read the devastation on Sarah's face. David finally met her eyes. Sarah, I want you to know that this decision came from above. Way above. If it were up to me… But it's not, is it? Sarah's voice carried a bitter edge she didn't recognize. It never is. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of office life continuing beyond the glass walls. People walking past, carrying coffee, discussing deadlines, living their Tuesday morning routines in blissful ignorance of the fact that Sarah Mitchell's carefully constructed world was collapsing in conference room B. I'll need you to clear out your office by end of business today, Patricia said gently. Security will escort you out, but it's just protocol. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. As if 9 years of her life, 9 years of 60-hour weeks, and missed family dinners and presentations crafted in the quiet hours before dawn could be reduced to protocol. 20 minutes later, Sarah stood in her office, former office, staring at the personal items that had made this sterile space feel like home. The photo of James at his medical school graduation, the small succulent her mother had given her, somehow thriving under fluorescent lights, the coffee mug from the company retreat in Branson, back when team building felt genuine rather than performative. Her hands moved automatically, placing items in the cardboard box security had provided. Around her, colleagues passed by her doorway with studied casualness, their discomfort palpable. Rebecca Martinez paused at the threshold, her face a mixture of relief and guilt. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea this was coming. None of us did. Sarah sealed the box with packing tape, the ripping sound unnaturally loud. Take care of yourself, Rebecca. The words carried weight they both understood. Take care of yourself, because no one else will. The drive home blurred past in a haze of familiar landmarks that suddenly felt foreign. Stop signs she'd passed thousands of times. The coffee shop, where she'd grabbed lunch during particularly brutal deadline weeks. The dry cleaner where she'd picked up the suit she'd worn to her last promotion meeting. Her phone buzzed as she pulled into her driveway. Mom calling for their usual Tuesday check-in, the weekly ritual that kept their small family connected, across the miles of their separate lives. Sarah stared at the phone until it stopped ringing. Then she sat in her car, cardboard box in the passenger seat, and tried to figure out how to tell the people who counted on her that she had nothing left to give. The silence stretched on, broken only by the tick of the cooling engine and the distant sound of her neighbor's lawnmower. Somewhere in that ordinary suburban quiet, her phone began to ring again. Unknown number, unknown caller, unknown future, opening like a door she wasn't sure she wanted to walk through, but she answered anyway, because what else was there left to lose? Ms. Mitchell? The voice was smooth, cultured, with just enough warmth to feel genuine. This is Marcus Webb. I imagine today has been rather difficult for you. Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. I'm sorry. Who is this? Someone who understands exactly what you're going through. The shock, the betrayal, the sudden realization that 9 years of loyalty means nothing when spreadsheets need balancing. His tone carried the weight of personal experience. I was wondering if you might have time for coffee. There's something I'd like to discuss that could be mutually beneficial. I don't understand. How did you get my number? Professional networks have a way of intersecting, Ms. Mitchell, especially when someone with your reputation suddenly becomes available. A pause, carefully timed. I'm at Grind Coffee on Maple Street, the corner booth. I'll be here for the next hour if you're interested in hearing about an opportunity that might help with some of the financial pressures you're undoubtedly calculating right now. The line went dead before Sarah could respond. She sat in her driveway, staring at the phone screen. The rational part of her mind, the part trained by 9 years of corporate caution, screamed warnings. Unknown caller. Suspicious timing. Knowledge he shouldn't possess. But the practical part, the part already drowning in mental arithmetic of bills and payments and dwindling savings, whispered a different message. What if this was the lifeline she needed? Grind Coffee occupied the corner of a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation service that had been closed since April. Sarah had driven past it thousands of times but never stopped. It was the kind of place that survived on location rather than ambiance. Fluorescent lighting, mismatched furniture, and the persistent smell of over-roasted beans. She spotted him immediately. Mid-40s, impeccably dressed in a way that suggested success without ostentation. His suit was well-tailored but not flashy. His watch expensive but understated. He looked up from his tablet as she approached, offering a smile that managed to be both sympathetic and confident. Ms. Mitchell, Marcus Webb. He stood and extended his hand. His grip was firm without being aggressive, the handshake of someone comfortable with authority. Thank you for coming. Please, sit. Sarah slid into the booth across from him, her eyes automatically cataloging details. Manicured nails, no wedding ring, laptop bag that cost more than her monthly car payment. Everything about him spoke of a man who had landed on his feet after whatever fall had brought him here. You know, I sat in a very similar place 5 years ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying just the right note of shared pain. Conference room, HR representative, the whole corporate theater of it's not personal, it's business. And except when it's your life they're dismantling, it feels pretty damn personal. You worked at Meridian? Senior Director of Strategic Planning. 8 years, 2 promotions, and a performance review that called me essential to the company's future vision. His smile turned rueful. 3 weeks later, I was escorted out by security. Strategic realignment, they called it. Sound familiar? Sarah nodded, the shared experience creating an unwelcome sense of kinship. What happened? After? Took me 6 months to realize I'd been looking at it all wrong. I kept thinking about what I'd lost instead of what I'd gained. Marcus leaned forward slightly, his tone shifting to something more intimate. Freedom, Ms. Mitchell. The freedom to choose who deserves your talents and expertise. He slid a manila envelope across the table. I represent a consulting firm that specializes in competitive intelligence. We help companies understand their market position, their competitor strategies, their vulnerabilities and opportunities. It's perfectly legal, thoroughly ethical, and extremely well compensated. Sarah's fingers traced the edge of the envelope without opening it. What kind of compensation? The initial contract is for 3 months, $75,000. He let the number settle between them like a stone dropped in still water, with the potential for renewal based on performance. The arithmetic was instantaneous and devastating. $75,000 would cover her mortgage for the rest of the year, her mother's medications, James's tuition, and still leave enough for breathing room she hadn't had in years. It was more than she'd made in 6 months at Meridian. What would I have to do? Your expertise in marketing strategy makes you uniquely qualified to analyze competitive positioning in the technology sector. Specifically, we're interested in understanding how certain companies approach product launches, their market research methodologies, their consumer targeting strategies. Marcus's voice remained casual, conversational. The kind of insights that would help our clients better position their own offerings. Which companies? Well, naturally, your experience with Meridian would be particularly valuable. Their upcoming product launches, their internal development processes, their strategic partnerships. He paused, watching her face carefully. I understand there's a project called Phoenix that represents a significant investment for them. Sarah's blood chilled. Project Phoenix was Meridian's most closely guarded initiative, a revolutionary approach to customer data integration that could transform how companies understood consumer behavior. She'd been peripherally involved in the marketing strategy discussions, but the technical details were classified at the highest levels. How do you know about Phoenix? Marcus's smile didn't waver. Ms. Mitchell, competitive intelligence is about connecting dots that others miss. Public filings, patent applications, industry conferences, former employees who understand the value of their knowledge. He leaned back, his posture relaxed, but his eyes sharp. The question isn't how I know about Phoenix. The question is whether you're interested in being compensated fairly for insights that Meridian clearly doesn't value enough to keep you employed. The logic was seductive in its simplicity. Why should she protect a company that had discarded her like outdated equipment? Why should her knowledge benefit people who had delivered her termination with corporate sympathy and 6 weeks severance? I'd need to think about it. Of course, this is a significant decision. Marcus reached into his jacket and withdrew. A business card, thick stock, embossed lettering, contact information for web strategic consulting. I can give you 72 hours to decide. That should be enough time to have some difficult conversations with your family about your financial situation. The words hit like a slap. He knew. Somehow, he knew about her mother's medical bills, about James's tuition, about the careful juggling act that kept her family afloat. The knowledge was both terrifying and strangely comforting. Here was someone who understood the stakes. There's also this. Marcus slid a sealed envelope across the table. A signing bonus, $5,000, cash, as a gesture of good faith. Consider it compensation for your time and consideration. Sarah stared at the envelope. $5,000 would cover her mother's next round of medications and buy her time to figure out what came next. It was exactly enough to solve her most immediate crisis while committing her to nothing more than consideration. I don't understand the rush. Competitive intelligence is time-sensitive, Ms. Mitchell. Market opportunities have windows that open and close quickly. Phoenix, for example, is scheduled for announcement in the next quarter. After that, the strategic value of certain insights diminishes significantly. Marcus checked his watch, the same casual gesture that somehow felt like pressure. 72 hours gives you time to make an informed decision without losing the opportunity. He stood, leaving both envelopes on the table. I'll be in touch Thursday morning for your answer. I hope you'll consider that loyalty should flow both ways, and Meridian has already made their position on that quite clear. Sarah watched him walk away, his confident stride carrying him out of the coffee shop and into the afternoon sunlight. She sat alone with the envelopes, the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders like a familiar burden. Around her, the coffee shop hummed with ordinary life. Students with laptops, retirees reading newspapers, young mothers managing toddlers between sips of caffeine. None of them knew that Sarah Mitchell was staring at what might be her salvation, or her damnation, wrapped in manila envelopes that felt heavier than they had any right to be. Her phone buzzed. James, texting about his interview tomorrow, full of excitement and gratitude for everything she'd done to make his dreams possible. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood, her brother's faith in her success arriving at the exact moment when that success had crumbled. She picked up the envelopes and walked to her car, Marcus's business card tucked between her fingers like a talisman. 72 hours to decide whether to cross a line she'd never imagined approaching. 72 hours to weigh survival against integrity, family against principles, desperation against everything she'd thought she believed about herself. The drive home passed in a blur of stop signs and familiar streets that suddenly felt like a foreign country. By the time she pulled into her driveway, the envelopes were hidden in her purse and her phone was ringing again. Mom, trying for the second time that day. This time, Sarah answered. Because whatever choice lay ahead of her, it would be made for the people who mattered most. And that realization was perhaps the most dangerous thing of all. Sweetheart, you sound tired. Carol Mitchell's voice carried the particular awareness that only mothers possess. The ability to detect distress through carefully modulated phone conversations and the spaces between words. Sarah closed her eyes, leaning against her kitchen counter. Just a long day, Mom. How are you feeling? Oh, you know me. Can't complain. The phrase was Carol's standard deflection, polished by years of protecting her children from her own struggles. James called this morning. He's so excited about his interview tomorrow. Keeps thanking me for everything we've done for him. The irony cut deep. Sarah had built a careful architecture of financial support around her family, hidden scaffolding that kept everyone's dreams intact while she carried the weight. Now that structure was crumbling, and she had perhaps 3 days before the collapse became visible to the people who counted on her most. That's wonderful, Mom. He's worked so hard. He has. We both know how much you've sacrificed to make this possible for him. Carol's voice softened with the particular gratitude that had defined their relationship since Sarah's father died. I just want you to know how proud I am. Both your father and I would be so proud of what you've built. The words hit like physical blows. Sarah turned away from the kitchen window, unable to look at the ordinary suburban view, while her mother unknowingly twisted the knife of her failure. Mom, speaking of sacrifices, how are you managing with your medications? The insurance situation? A pause. Too long. Too careful. Everything's fine, honey. Don't you worry about me. Mom. Sarah, you have enough on your plate. My health is my responsibility. It's not, though. We're family. If you're struggling, I'm not struggling. The firmness in Carol's voice carried an edge of pride that Sarah recognized from her own reflection. I'm managing just fine. Your job is to take care of yourself and focus on your career. That's what your father would have wanted. Sarah closed her eyes, seeing with perfect clarity the stack of unopened medical bills her mother was undoubtedly hiding somewhere in her small apartment. Carol Mitchell had worked 3 jobs after her husband's death to keep food on the table and dreams alive for her children. She'd sacrificed her own health, her own happiness, her own future for theirs. And now, when that future was supposed to provide security in return, Sarah had nothing to offer. I love you, Mom. I love you too, sweetheart. Now get some rest. Tomorrow's always another day. Sarah hung up and immediately called James. He answered on the first ring, his voice bright with the particular energy of someone whose life was unfolding exactly as planned. Sarah, perfect timing. I just finished my prep for tomorrow's interview. Dr. Patterson thinks I have a real shot at the pediatric surgery track if I nail this presentation. That's incredible, James. I'm so proud of you. I keep thinking about Dad, you know? How he always said education was the one thing nobody could take away from you. I wish he could see this. James's voice carried the earnest emotion that had defined him since childhood, the idealism that Sarah had worked so hard to protect. I know how much you've given up to make this possible. The late nights, the extra work, covering Mom's expenses so I could focus on school. Each word landed like a weight on Sarah's chest. Her brother's gratitude, so pure and deserving, made Marcus Webb's offer feel both more necessary and more poisonous. You don't need to think about that, James. You've earned this. Focus on tomorrow. I will, but Sarah, after I'm done. With residency, when I'm actually earning doctor money, I want to start paying you back, for everything. You and Mom have sacrificed so much. James, no, I mean it. I've been keeping track. Rough numbers, but I know you've covered at least $40,000 in tuition over the years, plus helping with Mom's medical bills. I want to make that right. $40,000. The number crystallized her situation with brutal clarity. James knew about some of the support she'd provided, but not the half of it. Not the second mortgage she'd taken to cover his undergraduate loans. Not the credit card debt she'd accumulated covering Carol's prescriptions. Not the careful financial house of cards that required her Meridian salary to remain standing. You don't owe me anything, James. Family takes care of family. Exactly. Which is why I'm going to take care of you once I can. You'll see. In a few years, you'll be able to stop worrying about money completely. Maybe even take that vacation you've been talking about forever. Sarah's throat tightened. The vacation she'd been talking about was a weekend trip to see James graduate from medical school, a dream that now seemed as distant as anything else requiring financial stability. After they hung up, Sarah sat in her quiet kitchen and let the weight of her situation settle around her like a familiar coat. Her family's happiness was built on her success, their dreams dependent on her ability to provide. Without her Meridian salary, the careful balance she'd maintained for years would collapse within months. She pulled out Marcus Webb's business card, studying the embossed lettering that somehow managed to suggest both legitimacy and mystery. Webb Strategic Consulting, the kind of name that could mean anything or nothing, carefully designed to avoid specificity. Her laptop was still in her bag, the personal one she'd used for work-from-home days that now felt like artifacts from a previous life. She opened it and began researching Marcus Webb, applying the same methodical approach she'd used for competitive analysis at Meridian. Webb Strategic Consulting had a professional website with the kind of carefully generic language that characterized corporate consulting, providing strategic intelligence solutions for market-leading organizations, leveraging competitive insights to drive business success, helping clients understand their marketplace advantages. Nothing illegal, nothing obviously unethical, but nothing specific enough to pin down either. Marcus Webb himself was harder to trace, a LinkedIn profile that showed his time at Meridian but was vague about his current role. A few mentions in industry publications about competitive intelligence methodologies. A speaking engagement at a conference about ethical frameworks in business intelligence. Everything legitimate on the surface, everything carefully constructed to avoid deeper scrutiny. But there were gaps. Employment history that jumped between consulting firms without clear explanations. Client testimonials that felt generic and unverifiable. A professional presence that was too polished, too carefully curated, like a resume designed to withstand investigation without inviting it. Sarah's phone rang, interrupting her research. Unknown number again. Ms. Mitchell, this is Elena Vasquez. I hope you don't mind me calling. David Kim mentioned you might need someone to talk to. Elena Vasquez. The name carried weight in corporate circles. A former CEO who'd built her own consulting firm from nothing and sold it for enough money to retire comfortably in her 50s. Sarah had met her at a few industry events, always been impressed by her directness and apparent integrity. Ms. Vasquez? Yes, it's been a difficult day. I imagine so. Terminations are never easy. especially when they're delivered with corporate doublespeak and false sympathy. Would you like to have coffee tomorrow? I find these conversations go better in person. The offer felt like a lifeline. Someone with experience, someone who understood the corporate world and its cruelties, someone who might help her navigate the choice that was consuming her thoughts. I'd like that very much. Good. There's a place called Grind Coffee on Maple Street. Do you know it? Sarah's blood chilled. The same coffee shop where Marcus Webb had made his offer. The same corner booth where she'd held his business card and felt the weight of his envelopes. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Yes, I know it. Excellent. 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. And Sarah, whatever you're considering right now, whatever opportunities have presented themselves today, sleep on it. The choices we make in crisis rarely serve us well in the long term. Elena hung up, leaving Sarah staring at her laptop screen and wondering how a day that had started with routine corporate betrayal had become a chess game with players she didn't recognize and rules she didn't understand. The envelopes Marcus had given her sat on her kitchen counter, unopened but heavy with possibility. $75,000. Enough to solve every immediate problem, enough to preserve the life she'd built for her family, enough to keep James in medical school and Carol in treatment and the illusion of stability intact for at least a few more months. All she had to do was betray everything she'd ever believed about integrity, loyalty, and the difference between right and wrong. Sarah closed her laptop and picked up the envelopes, feeling their weight in her hands. Tomorrow, she would talk to Elena Vasquez and hope for wisdom. Tonight, she would lie awake, calculating the cost of survival and wondering if some prices were too high to pay. But as she looked around her kitchen, at the photos of James's graduation, at the Father's Day card she'd helped him make when he was 8, at the small shrine of family memories that justified every sacrifice she'd ever made, she knew that the arithmetic of love was more complex than any corporate spreadsheet, and infinitely more dangerous. The morning meeting with Elena Vasquez had left Sarah with more questions than answers. Elena's warnings about corporate espionage had been delivered with the weight of experience, but they'd also revealed how little Sarah understood about the world Marcus Webb inhabited. Now, sitting in her home office with her laptop open and Marcus's business card propped against her monitor, she felt like an amateur chess player suddenly thrust into a grandmaster tournament. The deeper she dug into Webb's strategic consulting, the more carefully constructed the facade became. The company's client testimonials read like they'd been written by the same person, professional but generic, praising strategic insights and competitive advantages without specifics. The case studies were similarly vague, describing successful outcomes for unnamed Fortune 500 companies in terms so broad they could apply to anything from market research to industrial espionage. But it was the gaps that troubled her most. Employment histories that jumped between consulting firms with suspicious frequency. Board appointments that lasted exactly long enough to avoid deeper investigation. A network of professional connections that felt too clean, too perfectly curated. Sarah's phone buzzed. Rebecca, asking if she wanted to grab coffee and catch up. The timing felt providential. Rebecca would have access to current Meridian projects, insight into the office dynamics Sarah had been abruptly severed from. More importantly, Rebecca was one of the few people who might inadvertently provide the kind of information Marcus was seeking. The thought made Sarah's stomach clench. Was she already thinking like a spy? Already calculating how to extract information from a friend who trusted her? Grind Coffee felt different in the afternoon sunlight. The harsh fluorescent lighting was softened by natural light streaming through dusty windows, and the usual crowd of remote workers had given way to high school students and retirees. Sarah chose a table near the back, away from the corner booth where Marcus had made his offer, as if physical distance could somehow insulate her from the moral complexity of her situation. Rebecca arrived 15 minutes late, her usual efficiency, disrupted by what looked like exhaustion. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and her normally immaculate appearance showed signs of stress. Wrinkled blouse, coffee stain on her sleeve, hair that had been hastily pulled back. "I'm so sorry," Rebecca said, sliding into the seat across from Sarah. "The office has been complete chaos since yesterday. Everyone's walking on eggshells trying to figure out who's next." "Next?" "You weren't the only one, Sarah. They laid off 12 people across 3 departments: marketing, strategic planning, customer analytics." Rebecca's voice dropped to a near whisper. "People are calling it Black Tuesday. Word is there's another round coming next month." The news hit Sarah like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on her own termination, her own crisis, that she hadn't considered the broader scope of Meridian's strategic realignment. 12 families suddenly facing the same arithmetic of desperation she was wrestling with. 12 people who might soon receive their own mysterious phone calls from smooth-talking consultants. "Who made the decisions?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew. "Thomas Meridian III. Apparently he's been planning this for months, working with some consulting firm to identify redundancies and optimization opportunities." Rebecca's fingers made air quotes around the corporate euphemisms. "David's been walking around like a zombie. I think he knew what was coming, but couldn't stop it." Sarah felt a flash of sympathy for her former boss, followed immediately by anger. David's guilt was real, but it didn't change the fact that he'd chosen his own security over protecting his team. It didn't change the fact that she was sitting in a coffee shop, contemplating betraying everything she'd believed about integrity because of his cowardice. "What about Phoenix?" The question slipped out before Sarah could stop herself. Rebecca's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "What about it? Is it still moving forward?" "With all the layoffs, I mean." "Sarah, you know I can't really talk about specific projects." Rebecca's tone carried a note of professional caution, but also curiosity. "Why are you asking?" Sarah scrambled for a plausible explanation. "I worked on the marketing strategy for months. I guess I'm curious whether all that effort is going to amount to anything, or if it'll get shelved like the Morrison expansion." "Oh no, Phoenix is definitely still priority 1. If anything, the layoffs are supposed to free up resources to focus on it." Rebecca leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Between you and me, I think that's the whole point. Thomas wants to prove he can deliver something big before the board meeting in December." "Board meeting?" "Succession planning. His grandfather's been talking about stepping down, and there's pressure from some board members to bring in outside leadership. Thomas thinks Phoenix will be his ticket to the CEO chair." Rebecca glanced around the coffee shop, then continued in an even lower voice. "The problem is the technical team is behind schedule. Some kind of integration issues with the customer data platform. They're scrambling to make the announcement deadline." Sarah's mind raced. Technical delays, integration issues, announcement. Deadlines. Exactly the kind of operational intelligence Marcus would find valuable. Information that could help a competitor time their own product launch, identify vulnerabilities in Meridian's strategy, potentially sabotage Phoenix entirely. "That sounds stressful for everyone involved," Sarah said, hating how calculating she sounded. "It is, especially for the core team. They're working crazy hours, and there's talk about bringing in outside contractors to help with the data architecture." Rebecca paused, studying Sarah's face. "Are you thinking about trying to get back in? Because honestly, I could put in a word. With your marketing background and knowledge of the project." "No," Sarah said quickly. "I'm exploring other options." Rebecca nodded, but her expression remained curious. "What kind of options?" "Consulting. There seems to be a market for competitive intelligence work." The words felt like acid in her mouth, but Rebecca's reaction was immediate and alarming. Her face went pale, and she looked around the coffee. shop with sudden paranoia. Sarah, please tell me you're not talking to headhunters from rival firms. Why? Because Thomas has been obsessed with information security lately. Ever since the layoffs were announced, he's been convinced that someone's going to try to poach key personnel or steal project details. He's had IT monitoring email, traffic, and phone records. People are scared to even talk about work outside the office. Sarah felt ice in her veins. If Thomas Meridian III was already paranoid about corporate espionage, then Marcus's interest in Phoenix took on a much more dangerous dimension. This wasn't just about competitive intelligence. It was about actively undermining a project that could determine the future leadership of a major corporation. I'm not talking to headhunters, Sarah said truthfully. But Rebecca, if you're right about Thomas monitoring communications, you need to be careful about what you say, who you trust. I know. It's gotten so bad that some people are using personal phones for any conversation that isn't directly work-related. Rebecca's voice carried a note of fear that Sarah had never heard before. I hate what this place has become. The paranoia, the backstabbing, the way everyone's looking over their shoulders. They talked for another 20 minutes, but Sarah's mind was elsewhere, processing the implications of what she'd learned. Phoenix wasn't just another product launch. It was the centerpiece of a corporate succession battle. Thomas Meridian III's entire future depended on its success, which meant he would do anything to protect it. And that made Marcus's interest exponentially more dangerous. As they parted ways, Rebecca gave Sarah a long hug. I hope you find something good, she said. You deserve better than what Meridian gave you. Sarah drove home in a daze, Rebecca's words echoing in her mind. You deserve better. The phrase felt like justification and condemnation rolled into one. She did deserve better. But did that justify taking Marcus's offer? Did corporate betrayal excuse personal betrayal in return? Her phone rang as she pulled into her driveway. Unknown number, but this time she recognized Marcus's voice immediately. Ms. Mitchell, I hope you're having a productive day. I wanted to check in and see how your research was progressing. My research? Into web strategic consulting, into the opportunities we discussed, into the current state of your former employer. His tone was casual, but there was an undercurrent of something harder. I imagine you've discovered some interesting information about Meridian's current projects. Sarah's blood chilled. Had he been watching her? Did he know about her meeting with Rebecca? I'm still considering your offer, she said carefully. Of course. But I hope you understand that time is becoming a factor. Market conditions are shifting, and certain opportunities won't remain available indefinitely. A pause, long enough, for Sarah to understand that this was no longer just a business proposition. I'd hate for you to miss out on something that could solve so many of your current challenges. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Marcus knew about her financial situation, her family's needs, her desperation. And now he was making it clear that his offer came with a deadline that wasn't negotiable. I understand, Sarah said. Excellent. I'll be in touch tomorrow for your final decision. I trust you'll make the choice that's best for everyone involved. The line went dead, leaving Sarah sitting in her car with the weight of an impossible decision pressing down on her shoulders. Rebecca's warnings about corporate paranoia, Elena's concerns about crossing ethical lines, Marcus's increasingly obvious pressure tactics, all of it swirled together into a perfect storm of moral complexity. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. Crushed the interview. They're fast-tracking my application. Should know about acceptance by Friday. Thanks for everything, sis. Couldn't have done this without you. Sarah stared at the message until her vision blurred. Friday. The same day Marcus expected her final answer. The same day her brother would learn whether his dreams of becoming a pediatric surgeon would become reality or crumble under the weight of financial impossibility. She closed her eyes and tried to imagine explaining to James that his sister had become a corporate spy to pay for his education. Tried to imagine looking her mother in the eye while hiding the source of the money that would pay for her cancer treatments. Tried to imagine living with herself after crossing a line she'd never thought she'd even approach. But she also tried to imagine the alternative. James dropping out of medical school, her mother rationing medications, the house she'd bought, with such pride going into foreclosure. The family she'd worked so hard to protect falling apart because she wasn't strong enough to do what survival required. Tomorrow, she would have to choose between the person she'd always been and the person desperation was forcing her to become. And for the first time since receiving Marcus's call, she wasn't sure which choice would destroy her more completely. Sarah had chosen the parking lot behind the old Blockbuster for their meeting. Neutral ground that felt appropriately melancholy for the conversation she suspected was coming. David Kim's text had been cryptic. Need to talk. Alone. There are things you need to know. The David she'd worked with for 9 years would never have resorted to such cloak and dagger communication. But then, the David she'd worked with for 9 years wouldn't have fired her via corporate euphemism either. He pulled up in his silver BMW just as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the empty parking lot. The abandoned video store behind them felt like a monument to obsolescence, a reminder of how quickly institutions that seemed permanent could crumble. David sat in his car for a long moment before getting out, and when he finally approached her, she could see the toll the last few days had taken. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his tie loosened, dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he'd slept as poorly as she had. Sarah. He stopped a few feet away, maintaining the distance of someone who knew he'd forfeited the right to casual intimacy. Thank you for coming. You said there were things I needed to know. There are, but first. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she'd seen him make countless times during stressful client presentations. I need you to understand that I never wanted this to happen. Firing you was the hardest thing I've ever had to do professionally. But you did it anyway. Because I was trapped. The words came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding them back for days. Thomas Meridian III has been planning this restructuring for months. He brought in a consulting firm to identify optimization opportunities, and your name was at the top of the list from day one. Sarah felt the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. Because I knew too much about Phoenix. David's expression confirmed what she'd already suspected. You weren't fired because of budget constraints, Sarah. You were fired because Thomas thinks you're a security risk. A security risk? You helped develop the original marketing strategy for Phoenix. You understand the consumer applications, the competitive advantages, the market positioning. David's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Thomas is convinced that someone's going to try to steal the technology before launch, and he wanted anyone with detailed knowledge either completely loyal or completely gone. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air. And I wasn't completely loyal? You asked too many questions during the last strategy meeting. About data privacy, about potential regulatory issues, about whether we'd done sufficient competitive analysis. David's smile was bitter. Questions that someone planning to sell information might ask. The irony was so sharp it was almost funny. Thomas Meridian III had fired her for asking the kind of ethical questions that might have prevented her from accepting Marcus Webb's offer. His paranoia had created the very security risk he'd been trying to eliminate. So, the consulting firm that recommended the layoffs. Webb Strategic Consulting. David said the name like it tasted bad. Marcus Webb himself presented the analysis that put you on the termination list. Except at the time, I thought it was just corporate efficiency. Analysis. Sarah's world tilted. Marcus hadn't approached her randomly after her termination. He'd orchestrated her firing in the first place, positioning himself as both the problem and the solution. The whole elaborate dance of corporate sympathy and shared victimhood had been a carefully constructed lie. You're telling me that Marcus Webb, the man who offered me a consulting contract, was working for Thomas when he recommended my termination? That's exactly what I'm telling you. David's voice carried the weight of someone who'd finally connected dots he'd been too trusting to see earlier. I started putting it together yesterday when I got called into Thomas's office for a strategy session. He wanted to know if I thought you'd be receptive to competitive intelligence approaches, if you were financially desperate enough to consider offers from rival firms. Sarah's hands were shaking now. What did you tell him? I told him you had too much integrity to ever betray the company. David's laugh was hollow, which apparently was exactly what he wanted to hear. He smiled and said that Webb's psychological profile had predicted you'd respond that way initially, but that financial pressure would eventually overcome ethical concerns. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope. Marcus hadn't just targeted her. He'd crafted her entire situation. The inadequate severance package, the timing of his approach, even his knowledge of her family's financial struggles. All of it orchestrated to create maximum desperation and minimum options. There's more, David continued. Webb Strategic Consulting isn't just any firm. They specialize in what they call competitive asset extraction. Essentially, they identify key personnel at target companies, create circumstances that make those personnel vulnerable to recruitment, then use them to extract proprietary information. Industrial espionage. Sophisticated, well-funded, highly effective industrial espionage. And Sarah? David's voice cracked slightly. Thomas isn't just their client for this Phoenix intelligence. He's their client for the entire operation. He's using Webb to steal information from his own company. Sarah felt like she was falling through space. What? Think about it. Thomas wants to prove he's ready to be CEO, but Phoenix is behind. Schedule and over budget. If he can't deliver it successfully, the board will bring in outside leadership. But if a competitor beats Meridian to market with similar technology, Thomas can blame corporate espionage rather than his own management failures. The picture was becoming clear, and it was more twisted than Sarah had imagined. He's planning to sabotage his own company's project? He's planning to control the narrative. If Phoenix fails because of external espionage, he's the victim. If it succeeds despite attempted espionage, he's the hero who protected company secrets. David's voice carried a note of disgusted admiration. Either way, he comes out looking like leadership material. Sarah thought about Marcus's increasing pressure, his knowledge of Phoenix's technical delays, his urgency about timing. And I was supposed to be the fall guy, the disgruntled former employee who sold out her company for money. Exactly. Webb would extract whatever information they needed through you, then probably arrange for you to be caught in some compromising position. Corporate spy exposed. Phoenix security breach explained. Thomas Meridian III saves the day. David kicked at the cracked pavement. The only problem with their plan is that it required you to actually take the bait. Which I haven't done. Yet. David's tone carried a warning. But Sarah, they're not going to just walk away because you're having moral qualms. Webb's firm has invested too much in setting up this operation, and Thomas has too much riding on its success. If summoned by their conversation, Sarah's phone began to ring. Unknown number, but she knew who it was before she answered. Ms. Mitchell. Marcus's voice was smooth as ever, but Sarah could hear the undercurrent of steel now that she knew what to listen for. I hope you're having a productive evening. I wanted to let you know that I'll need your decision by tomorrow morning. I thought I had until Thursday. Unfortunately, market conditions have accelerated our timeline. There's also the matter of your continued research into our firm and your conversations with former colleagues. The threat was no longer even slightly veiled. I'd hate for anyone to get the wrong impression about your activities. Sarah looked at David, who was watching her with growing alarm. I understand. Excellent. I'll call you at 9 a.m. tomorrow for your final answer. I trust you'll make the right choice for everyone involved. A pause. Including your family. The line went dead, leaving Sarah and David standing in the gathering darkness of an abandoned parking lot, surrounded by the ghosts of a simpler time when the worst corporate betrayal was overpriced video rentals. He knows we're talking, Sarah said. Probably. Thomas has people monitoring anyone connected to Phoenix. Phone records, credit card transactions, GPS data from company phones. David's voice was grim. I'm probably going to be fired tomorrow. For meeting with you. Then why did you? Because watching you get destroyed by this conspiracy would have been worse than losing my job. David managed a weak smile. Turns out I do have some integrity left, even if it took me too long to find it. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from James. Got into the residency program, starting paperwork for the loan applications tomorrow. So grateful for everything you've done to make this possible. She showed David the message, watching his face crumple as he understood the full scope of her impossible situation. I'm sorry, he whispered. I'm so goddamn sorry for all of this. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of every choice that had led her to this moment. Tomorrow morning she would have to give Marcus Webb her final answer. She could accept his offer and become a willing participant in a conspiracy that would destroy her former employer and her own integrity. Or she could refuse and watch her family's financial security crumble while Marcus and Thomas Meridian III found another way to execute their plan. But now she knew there was a third option, one that terrified her more than either of the others, but that might be the only way to save both her family and her soul. She was going to have to beat them at their own game. David, she said, opening her eyes and looking at him with new resolve. How would you feel about helping me destroy both of them? David's expression shifted from guilt to something approaching. Hope, though it was tempered by the recognition of how dangerous Sarah's proposal could be. You want to take on both Marcus Webb and Thomas Meridian III? Sarah, these aren't just corporate bullies we're talking about. Webb runs a sophisticated espionage operation, and Thomas has the resources of an entire corporation behind him, which is exactly why a frontal assault won't work. Sarah pulled out her phone and began typing notes as she spoke, her marketing strategist mind already mapping out the complexities of what she was proposing. We need to use their own tactics against them. Make them think they're winning while we document everything they're doing wrong. The plan that began forming in Sarah's mind was audacious in its scope and terrifying in its implications. She would have to become exactly what Marcus Webb wanted her to be, a corporate spy willing to sell out her former employer for money. But instead of actually providing him with Phoenix's real secrets, she would feed him carefully crafted disinformation while secretly recording every interaction, every illegal request, every piece of evidence that could expose the entire conspiracy. You're talking about accepting Webb's offer, David said, his voice carrying a mixture of admiration and concern. Playing the role of a willing collaborator while actually working to expose them. It's the only way to get close enough to gather the evidence we need. Elena Vasquez warned me about the corporate intelligence world. It's all about plausible deniability and careful documentation. Webb and Thomas have been careful to keep their hands clean on paper. We need to get them to incriminate themselves. Directly. Sarah began pacing the empty parking lot, her mind racing through the logistical challenges. I'll need to make the recordings legally admissible, which means understanding wiretapping laws and consent requirements. I'll need to create believable but ultimately harmless disinformation to feed Marcus. Information that seems valuable but won't actually damage Meridian if it leaks. And I'll need someone on the inside to help coordinate the evidence gathering. That's where I come in, David said, understanding beginning to dawn on his face. I'm probably going to be fired anyway, for meeting with you tonight, but if I can document Thomas's direct involvement in the conspiracy before I'm terminated, Exactly. But David, you need to understand what we're risking here. If we're caught, this goes beyond employment termination. Corporate espionage carries federal criminal penalties. We could be looking at prison time. David was quiet for a long moment, staring at the abandoned Blockbuster sign that seemed to mock their conversation about corporate survival and adaptation. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a resolve that Sarah hadn't heard since their early days working together on challenging client campaigns. I've spent the last 2 days watching myself in the mirror and hating what I see. I became exactly the kind of corporate coward I used to despise. Someone who sacrifices good people to protect his own position. He looked directly at Sarah, his eyes clear for the first time since their reunion. Maybe this is my chance to remember who I used to be before fear turned me into Thomas Meridian's accomplice. Sarah felt a familiar surge of the collaborative energy that had made their professional partnership so effective years earlier. We'll need to move fast. Marcus wants my answer by 9 a.m. tomorrow, which means I have less than 12 hours to set up recording equipment, research the legal requirements, and create a convincing psychological transformation from ethical executive to desperate corporate spy. What about your family? If this goes wrong, you won't just lose the money from Webb's offer. You could lose everything. The question hit at the heart of Sarah's deepest fear. James was counting on her support for his final year of medical school. Her mother's cancer treatments required expensive medications that insurance only partially covered. The house that represented everything she'd built was already mortgaged to its limits. Failure wouldn't just mean professional disgrace. It would mean watching the people she loved most pay the price for her decision to fight back. I keep thinking about something my father told me when I was 16. Right after his cancer diagnosis, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger as she found her moral center again. He said that integrity isn't about making the right choice when it's easy. It's about making the right choice when it costs you everything you think you can't afford to lose. Her phone buzzed with another text from James. Sarah, I know I keep saying this, but I need you to know how much your support has meant. Dad would be so proud of the woman you've become. You've never let our family down, and I know you never will. Sarah showed the message to David, watching him understand the crushing weight of her brother's faith. James believes I'll never let him down. But if I take Marcus's money and become what he wants me to become, I'll be letting down the person my father raised me to be. And that's a betrayal I couldn't live with, regardless of the financial consequences. David nodded slowly. Then we do this. But we do it smart, and we do it with every possible safeguard in place. Sarah began outlining the tactical requirements. I'll need a recording device that's undetectable but legally sufficient for evidence. I'll need to research Phoenix's technical specifications well enough to create convincing but ultimately harmless disinformation. And I'll need to practice becoming someone I've never been, someone willing to sell out their principles for money. The recording equipment isn't a problem. My brother-in-law works in private investigation. He can get us professional-grade surveillance gear that'll hold up in court. As for the Phoenix information, I still have access to the project files. I can pull together technical details that sound impressive, but won't actually compromise the real development work. What about your own position? Thomas will be suspicious if you suddenly start accessing Phoenix files after our meeting tonight. David smiled grimly. Thomas already suspects me of being a security risk because of my relationship with you. If I'm going to be fired anyway, I might as well make it count. I'll document everything I can about his involvement with Webb Strategic Consulting before they escort me out of the building. Sarah felt the familiar of a well-constructed plan beginning to take shape, but she also felt the weight of everything that could go wrong. David, once we start this, there's no going back. We'll be crossing lines that will change us permanently, regardless of how it ends. I know. But Sarah, I've already crossed lines I never thought I'd cross. I fired one of the most talented People I've ever worked with because I was too afraid to stand up to corporate pressure. I participated in a conspiracy I didn't fully understand because it was easier than asking hard questions. David's voice carried the weight of someone who'd finally accepted the cost of his previous choices. Maybe this is my chance to cross some lines in the right direction. As they finalized the preliminary details of their plan, Sarah felt a strange sense of peace settling over her decision. For the first time since receiving Marcus's call, she wasn't choosing between impossible alternatives. She was choosing to fight back against people who had manipulated her situation and underestimated her capabilities. "There's one more thing," she said as they prepared to leave the parking lot. "Elena Vasquez. She has experience with corporate intelligence operations and connections in the legal world. If we're going to expose a conspiracy this sophisticated, we'll need someone who understands how to present evidence to federal investigators." "You think she'll help us?" "I think she's been waiting 30 years for someone to ask her to help take down the kind of corporate corruption she's had to navigate her entire career." Sarah smiled for the first time in days, feeling the return of the strategic confidence that had built her professional reputation. Elena Vasquez didn't become a successful CEO by backing down from fights that mattered. As David drove away, Sarah sat in her car and began composing the most important text message of her professional life. To Elena, "I've decided to accept Webb's offer, but not in the way he expects. Can you meet me tomorrow morning at 7 a.m.? I need legal advice about evidence gathering and federal whistleblower protections." The response came back within minutes. "I've been hoping you'd decide to fight back rather than just survive. 7 a.m. at my office. Bring everything you have on Webb Strategic Consulting. We have work to do." Sarah drove home through suburban streets that no longer felt foreign, planning the performance of her lifetime. Tomorrow morning, she would become someone she'd never been before, a woman desperate enough to betray her principles for money. But underneath that performance, she would remain exactly who her father had raised her to be. Someone who fought back when fighting back was the only way to protect the people she loved. The house felt different when she walked inside. No longer a sanctuary under threat, but a command center for the most important mission of her life. She spread Marcus's cash across her kitchen table one more time, but now it looked less like a temptation and more like evidence in a federal case that was about to begin. 9 a.m. arrived with the punctuality of a corporate execution. Sarah sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by the carefully orchestrated evidence of her supposed desperation. Unpaid bills arranged just so, Marcus's cash envelope prominently displayed, and a laptop, open to job search websites that painted the picture of someone running out of options. The recording device Elena had provided was barely visible, disguised as a decorative pen holder that could capture conversation from across the room. When Marcus called, Sarah let it ring 4 times before answering, practicing the hesitation of someone making a decision they knew would change them forever. "Mr. Webb, I've been expecting your call." "Ms. Mitchell, I trust you've had time to fully consider our offer and its implications for your family's future." His voice carried the same smooth confidence, but Sarah could now hear the predatory undertone that her desperation had previously masked. "I have, and I want to accept your consulting contract." She let her voice carry just the right note of resigned defeat, the sound of someone who'd exhausted all other alternatives. "But I need to understand exactly what you're asking me to do." "Excellent decision. I knew you'd see the practical benefits of our arrangement." Marcus's tone shifted to what she now recognized as his recruiting voice, warm, supportive, designed to make her feel like she was making a smart business decision rather than crossing a moral line. "The work is quite straightforward. We need detailed competitive analysis of Meridian's Phoenix project, technical specifications, timeline information, potential vulnerabilities in their market approach." Sarah had rehearsed this moment with Elena and David for 2 hours the night before, but actually saying the words still felt like swallowing poison. "You want me to steal proprietary information about Phoenix and sell it to you?" I prefer to think of it as competitive intelligence. Consulting. You're providing strategic insights based on your professional experience and industry knowledge. Marcus's ability to reframe industrial espionage as legitimate business practice was masterful. Information that Meridian clearly didn't value enough to keep you employed to protect. The conversation continued for 25 minutes, with Marcus gradually escalating his requests from general competitive insights to specific technical details that could only be obtained through direct access to classified project files. Sarah played her part perfectly, asking about payment schedules and legal protections, while secretly documenting every illegal request Marcus made. "I'll need an initial intelligence package by Friday," Marcus said, as the call neared its end. "Technical architecture details, competitive positioning analysis, and timeline projections for the product announcement. In return, you'll receive the first installment of your consulting fee, $25,000. And after Friday? We'll assess the value of your initial contribution and discuss ongoing arrangements, potentially a much more lucrative, long-term consulting relationship." Marcus paused, and Sarah could hear the implicit threat beneath his words. "Of course, the quality and accuracy of your intelligence will determine the future of our professional relationship." After Marcus hung up, Sarah sat in her quiet kitchen and let the magnitude of what she'd just committed to settle around her. She'd agreed to steal corporate secrets, betray her former employer's trust, and participate in a conspiracy that could destroy both Phoenix and her own integrity. The fact that she was secretly working to expose that same conspiracy didn't diminish the immediate reality of what she'd just become. Her phone rang again. David, calling from his office with the strained voice of someone trying to conduct sensitive business under surveillance. "Sarah, we have a problem. Thomas called an emergency meeting this morning with all department heads. He's implementing new security protocols for anyone who had access to Phoenix files. I think our conversation last night triggered some kind of security alert." Sarah felt ice forming in her stomach. What kind of protocols? "Immediate suspension of network access for anyone flagged as a potential security risk. That includes me, Rebecca Martinez, and 3 other people who worked on Phoenix marketing strategy." David's voice carried the carefully controlled panic of someone watching their world collapse in real time. "I'm supposed to surrender my access cards and company equipment by noon today." The timing couldn't be worse. Sarah needed David's inside access to gather evidence of Thomas's conspiracy with Web Strategic Consulting, but now he was being systematically isolated from any information that could be useful. Meanwhile, Marcus expected detailed Phoenix intelligence by Friday, intelligence that would require access to files that were now under enhanced security protection. "Can you get to Thomas's office before you're locked out? Document whatever you can about his relationship with Webb?" "I'm trying, but his assistant is screening all visitors now. The paranoia level has gone through the roof since yesterday." David paused, and Sarah could hear voices in the background. "Sarah, I have to go. Security is here to escort me out." The line went dead, leaving Sarah alone with the realization that her carefully constructed plan was falling apart before it had really begun. Without David's inside access, she had no way to gather evidence of Thomas's conspiracy. Without legitimate Phoenix information to feed Marcus, she couldn't maintain her cover as a willing collaborator long enough to record him making incriminating statements. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Ms. Mitchell, I think it's time we met in person to discuss your consulting arrangements. How about lunch today at Meridian Tower? The restaurant on the 40th floor. 1 o'clock. Sarah stared at the message, recognizing the aggressive move of someone who'd detected a threat and decided to confront it directly. Marcus wasn't just escalating their business relationship. He was testing her commitment by forcing her to enter enemy territory. Meridian Tower, where her former colleagues would see her dining with a man who'd orchestrated her termination. Where Thomas Meridian III would be able to observe her behavior and assess whether his psychological manipulation had worked as intended. She called Elena immediately. "He wants to meet at Meridian Tower for lunch. This feels like a trap." "It is a trap, but not the kind you think." Elena's voice carried the calm authority of someone who'd navigated corporate warfare for decades. "Marcus is testing whether you're genuinely desperate enough to go through with betraying your former employer. Meeting you at Meridian Tower serves multiple purposes. It demonstrates your commitment to him, humiliates you in front of your former colleagues, and provides Thomas with visual confirmation that his psychological manipulation has been successful. So I should go?" "You should go, but not for the reasons Marcus expects. This is your opportunity to get him on record making specific illegal requests while you're in a location where federal investigators can easily verify the meeting took place." Elena paused, and Sarah could hear papers rustling. "I've been making some calls this morning. The FBI has a corporate crimes unit that specializes in industrial espionage cases. If we can provide them with sufficient evidence, they'll open a formal investigation." Sarah spent the rest of the morning preparing for what felt like walking into a lion's den. She reviewed the technical disinformation David had provided before his termination, Phoenix details that sounded sophisticated but would ultimately mislead any competitor who tried to use them. She practiced the body language of someone who'd accepted their moral compromise, the defeated posture of a woman who'd chosen financial survival over personal integrity. At 12:30, she drove to Meridian Tower, the glass monument to corporate success where she'd worked for 9 years before being discarded like outdated equipment. The building felt different now that she no longer belonged there. More imposing, more hostile, a fortress designed to exclude people like her. Marcus was already waiting at a corner table in the 40th floor restaurant, positioned to provide a panoramic view of the city, while ensuring their conversation couldn't be overheard. He stood as she approached, offering the same confident smile that had first seemed sympathetic, but now revealed itself as the predatory expression of someone who enjoyed the hunt as much as the kill. "Ms. Mitchell, you look lovely. Please sit." He gestured to the chair across from him, positioning her so that she faced the restaurant's interior, while he maintained visual surveillance of their surroundings. "I hope you don't mind meeting here. I thought it might be therapeutic for you to see your former workplace from a position of renewed strength." Sarah recognized the psychological manipulation immediately, forcing her to confront her termination while simultaneously offering her a path to revenge against the people who'd discarded her. Marcus was a master at exploiting human psychology, understanding exactly which emotional buttons to press to make his targets compliant. "It's fine," she said, settling into her chair and activating the recording device Elena had sewn into her jacket lining. "Though I have to admit, being here makes me realize how much I want Meridian to pay for what they did to me." Marcus's smile widened, recognizing the words he'd been hoping to hear. "That's exactly the spirit we need for this project, Ms. Mitchell. Righteous anger can be a powerful motivating force when properly channeled." What followed was 90 minutes of the most sophisticated criminal recruitment Sarah had ever witnessed. Marcus systematically escalated his requests from general competitive intelligence to specific technical theft, all while framing each illegal act as justified retaliation against corporate injustice. He provided detailed instructions for accessing classified files, suggested methods for circumventing security protocols, and offered increasingly substantial payments for information that could only be obtained through federal crimes. "The beauty of our arrangement," Marcus said as their lunch neared its end, "is that we're not asking you to do anything truly harmful. Meridian has already demonstrated their disregard for your loyalty and expertise. We're simply ensuring that your knowledge finds more appreciative recipients." Sarah played her part perfectly, asking practical questions about payment schedules and security precautions, while the hidden recording device captured every word of Marcus's careful instructions for corporate espionage. But as the conversation continued, she began to realize that Marcus Webb was far more dangerous than she'd initially understood. He wasn't just a corporate spy. He was a psychological predator who understood exactly how to transform desperate people into willing criminals. His approach was so sophisticated, so carefully calibrated to exploit human vulnerabilities that Sarah began to understand how even fundamentally ethical people could be manipulated into betraying everything they'd once believed about themselves. As they prepared to leave, Marcus handed her a manila envelope. "Your first payment, as discussed, $25,000, with the remainder to follow upon delivery of the Phoenix intelligence package." Sarah accepted the envelope, feeling the weight of money that represented both her family's salvation and her own damnation. "And Friday is still the deadline?" "Friday at noon. I'll call you with delivery instructions." Marcus stood, extending his hand for a farewell handshake that felt like sealing a contract with the devil. "Ms. Mitchell, I want you to know how much I appreciate your pragmatic approach to this situation. Not everyone has the strength to make the choices that survival requires." As Sarah walked through Meridian Tower's lobby, envelope of blood money, in her purse and recording device containing evidence of federal crimes in her jacket, she felt the weight of everything that could still go wrong. She'd successfully documented Marcus's criminal intentions, but she still needed to deliver some form of Phoenix intelligence by Friday to maintain her cover long enough for federal investigators to act. The plan had worked perfectly, except for one detail that might destroy everything. She still had no way to access the real Phoenix files that Marcus expected, and creating convincing disinformation would require technical expertise she didn't possess. As she reached her car, her phone rang. Thomas Meridian III, calling personally for the first time since her termination. "Ms. Mitchell, I understand you had lunch with Marcus Webb today. I think it's time we had a conversation about your future." The last place Sarah expected to find herself at 3 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon was sitting across from Thomas Meridian III in his corner office, surrounded by the trappings of inherited power that he wielded with the casual cruelty of someone who'd never had to earn what he possessed. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding view of the city, while carefully curated family portraits reminded visitors that the Meridian name carried weight that transcended simple corporate authority. Thomas sat behind a mahogany desk that had belonged to his grandfather, the company's founder, but where the elder Meridian had been known for his integrity and employee loyalty, Thomas radiated the cold calculation of someone who viewed human resources as expendable assets in a strategic game. He was younger than Sarah had expected, probably mid-30s, with the kind of Ivy League polish that came from never having to doubt whether doors would open when he approached them. "Ms. Mitchell, thank you for coming on such short notice." His voice carried the particular brand of courtesy that powerful people used when they were about to destroy someone's life. "I hope you don't mind the informal nature of this meeting, but I felt we needed to discuss your recent career developments before they became problematic for everyone involved." Sarah forced herself to maintain the posture of someone who'd already compromised her principles, someone who had nothing left to lose because she'd already lost everything that mattered. The recording device in her jacket felt heavier than it had any right to, a technological lifeline that might either save her or provide evidence for her own prosecution. "I'm not sure what you mean by problematic," she said, though her stomach was churning with the recognition that Thomas knew far more about her activities than she'd hoped. "Please, Ms. Mitchell. We're both intelligent people who understand how corporate intelligence works." Thomas leaned back in his chair, his expression carrying the satisfied confidence of someone who held all the cards. "You've been terminated from Meridian Corporation due to strategic realignment. You've met with Marcus Webb, a known operator in the competitive intelligence field. You've accepted what I assume is a substantial consulting contract. The progression is quite predictable." Sarah felt ice forming in her veins. If Thomas knew about her agreement with Marcus, then he either had surveillance on both of them, or Marcus had reported back to him directly. Either scenario suggested that her carefully constructed plan to expose their conspiracy was walking directly into a trap that had been designed specifically for her. "I don't know what you think you know about my activities. I know that Marcus Webb offered you $75,000 for detailed intelligence about Project Phoenix." Thomas's interruption was delivered with the casual precision of someone reading from a script. I know that you accepted his offer this morning during a phone conversation that took place at 9:03 a.m. from your kitchen. I know that you met him for lunch at the restaurant on the 40th floor of this building, where you received your first payment. The level of surveillance was staggering, but what terrified Sarah most was the implication that Thomas wasn't trying to stop her espionage activities. He was confirming them. If he wanted to prevent her from stealing Phoenix secrets, "You're not trying to stop me," she said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "Stop you?" Thomas laughed, the sound carrying no warmth whatsoever. "Ms. Mitchell, I'm counting on you. You're an essential component of a much larger strategy that you've been too focused on your own situation to recognize." The pieces began falling into place with horrifying clarity. Thomas hadn't just hired Webb Strategic Consulting to identify security risks. He'd hired them to create those risks. Sarah wasn't a target of corporate espionage. She was a weapon in Thomas's campaign to control the narrative around Phoenix's potential failure. "You orchestrated my termination specifically to make me vulnerable to Marcus's recruitment." "Among other factors, yes. Your psychological profile suggested that financial desperation would eventually overcome ethical resistance, particularly given your family's medical expenses and your brother's educational costs." Thomas spoke about her life with the detached, clinical interest of someone discussing lab results. "Marcus predicted that it would take approximately 72 hours from initial contact for you to accept our offer, and his assessment proved remarkably accurate." Sarah felt nauseous as she understood the sophistication of the manipulation she'd fallen into. Every choice she'd made, every moral compromise she'd wrestled with, had been anticipated and planned for by people who understood human psychology better than she understood herself. "But you don't actually want me to steal Phoenix secrets. You want me to be caught stealing them?" "Very good. Yes. Corporate espionage only serves its purpose if it's discovered at precisely the right moment. Too early, and we can't extract maximum value from the security breach narrative. Too late, and the damage control becomes more complicated than necessary." Thomas opened a file folder on his desk, revealing what appeared to be surveillance, photographs of her lunch with Marcus. "Your capture will be timed to provide maximum benefit for Meridian's board presentation and my own advancement opportunities." The cruelty was breathtaking. Thomas had orchestrated her termination, her family's financial crisis, and her moral compromise not to steal corporate secrets, but to create a scapegoat for his own management failures. She was supposed to be caught, prosecuted, and destroyed, so that he could emerge as the executive who'd protected Meridian from corporate espionage. "What about Marcus? Is he working for you, or are you working for him?" "Marcus is a contractor who provides specialized services for clients who understand the value of strategic narrative control. Sometimes that means gathering intelligence. Sometimes it means protecting intelligence. And sometimes it means creating the appearance of intelligence theft for political purposes." Thomas's smile was genuinely cold now. "In your case, it means all three." Sarah's mind raced through the implications. If Marcus was working directly for Thomas, then everything about the Phoenix intelligence he'd requested was potentially fabricated. The technical specifications, the competitive analysis, the timeline information, none of it might actually be intended for external theft. Marcus might simply be creating a paper trail that would justify Sarah's prosecution while providing Thomas with the corporate espionage narrative he needed. "You're planning to have me arrested for stealing information that you're deliberately providing. The beauty of the arrangement is that you will actually be stealing legitimate Phoenix intelligence. The crime will be completely real, which makes the prosecution straightforward and the narrative compelling." Thomas stood and walked to his window, looking out over the city with the satisfaction of someone who owned more of it than most people realized. "You'll be caught with genuine corporate secrets, tried for actual federal crimes, and sentenced to real prison time. Nothing fabricated, nothing that won't stand up to legal scrutiny." Sarah felt the weight of her situation crushing down on her with the force of someone buried alive. She'd thought she was playing chess with Marcus and Thomas, but they'd been playing a completely different game. One where she was never a player, but always a piece to be moved and eventually sacrificed. My family will be destroyed. Your family will be provided for, actually. Marcus's consulting payments will ensure that your mother's medical treatments continue and your brother's education is completed. From their perspective, you'll have made the ultimate sacrifice to secure their future. Thomas turned back to face her, his expression carrying what might have been genuine sympathy if it hadn't been so calculating. Emotionally devastating for them, certainly, but financially secure. The phone in Sarah's jacket was still recording, capturing every word of Thomas's confession to conspiracy, corporate manipulation, and the deliberate destruction of her life. But she was beginning to realize that even with evidence of his crimes, she might not survive long enough to present it to federal investigators. When? She asked. Friday afternoon, shortly after you deliver the Phoenix intelligence package to Marcus. Federal agents will arrest you at the handoff location, which will conveniently be captured by surveillance cameras that will provide compelling footage for the evening news. Thomas returned to his desk, his tone shifting to something approaching, business-like courtesy. You'll be portrayed as a disgruntled former employee who sold out her company for money. I'll be the vigilant executive who detected the security breach and protected corporate assets. Sarah stood slowly, her legs feeling unsteady beneath the weight of everything she now understood. And if I refuse to deliver the Phoenix intelligence? Then your brother's medical school loan applications will be mysteriously denied, your mother's insurance coverage will be terminated for administrative reasons, and your mortgage will be called due immediately due to changes in your employment status. Thomas's voice carried the casual certainty of someone who controlled more systems than his victims realized. Marcus's consulting payments will disappear, leaving you with no way to address the financial crisis that led you to accept his offer in the first place. The trap was perfect in its cruelty. Sarah could either participate in her own destruction by delivering the Phoenix intelligence, or watch her family's life collapse while she remained powerless to help them. Either choice led to the same destination, her destruction and Thomas's advancement. I need to go, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Of course. You have a great deal to process and important decisions to make. Thomas returned to his paperwork with the dismissive casualness of someone who'd completed a routine business transaction. Ms. Mitchell, I want you to know that I take no personal pleasure in this situation. You're simply an unfortunate casualty of larger strategic necessities. Sarah walked through Meridian Tower's lobby in a daze, past security guards who nodded politely at someone they didn't recognize as a former employee, past corporate art that celebrated innovation and integrity while hiding the rot that had consumed the company's soul. The elevator descent felt like falling through space, carrying her away from the heights of corporate power toward a ground-level reality where ordinary people paid the price for games played by those who could afford to treat human lives as strategic resources. Her car felt like a sanctuary until she realized that Thomas probably had it under surveillance too. Every conversation, every movement, every decision was being monitored by people who understood her psychology better than she understood herself. The recording device in her jacket contained evidence of federal crimes, but she was beginning to doubt whether anyone would be alive to hear it if Thomas had anticipated her attempt to gather evidence. The drive home passed in a blur of suburban, streets that felt like a foreign country. Stop signs and traffic lights, children playing in yards, neighbors walking dogs, all the normal rhythms of ordinary life continuing while her world collapsed into a nightmare of corporate conspiracy and calculated cruelty. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. Sis, just wanted to let you know that the loan applications went through without any problems. Amazing how smoothly everything is falling into place. Feel like Dad is watching over us and making sure everything works out. Sarah stared at the message until her vision blurred with tears. James's innocent faith in their family's good fortune, completely unaware that every positive development in his life was part of a larger plan to destroy his sisters. The loan applications had been approved because Thomas wanted to ensure that James would be financially dependent on Marcus's payments when Sarah was arrested. Even her family's happiness had been weaponized against her. Sarah spent Thursday night in her kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of a life that no longer belonged to her. Marcus's cash sat on the table like a criminal exhibit, the recording device played back hours of incriminating conversations, and her laptop displayed draft emails to federal investigators that she might not live long enough to send. Every option led to destruction, hers, her family's, or both. At 2:47 a.m., her phone rang. Elena Vasquez, calling with the urgency of someone who'd discovered information that couldn't wait for morning. Sarah, I've been digging into Webb Strategic Consulting's financial records, and I found something that changes everything. Elena's voice carried the controlled excitement of someone who'd found the key to a puzzle that had been driving her crazy. They're not just a corporate intelligence firm. They're a front operation for a much larger conspiracy involving multiple corporations and potentially federal contract fraud. What do you mean? Webb Strategic has contracts with 17 different companies for competitive intelligence services. But the pattern of their activities suggests they're playing all sides against each other. They're not just stealing information, they're creating artificial market conditions that benefit a specific group of investors who always seem to know exactly when to buy and sell stock in affected companies. Sarah felt a spark of hope for the first time in hours. You're saying this is bigger than just Thomas and Marcus? Much bigger. This is organized corporate manipulation on a scale that would interest federal prosecutors even without your recording of Thomas's confession. But Sarah, it also means these people have resources and connections that make them exponentially more dangerous than we realized. Elena had spent her career navigating corporate warfare, but even she sounded shaken by what she'd discovered. I've contacted Agent Jennifer Chen at the FBI's Corporate Crimes Division. She's agreed to meet with us tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., 1 hour before your scheduled handoff with Marcus. We'll present everything we have and hope federal protection is enough to keep you alive. What if it's not enough? What if Thomas has connections in law enforcement? Then we make this so public that killing you becomes more dangerous than letting you live. Elena's voice carried the determination of someone who'd spent decades fighting powerful people who thought they were untouchable. I've prepared a media package with copies of all our evidence. If anything happens to you, it goes to every major news outlet simultaneously. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of a decision that would either save her life or destroy it completely. Elena, there's something else. Thomas knows about the recording device. He knows I've been gathering evidence. This feels like another trap. It might be. But Sarah, we're past the point where playing it safe is an option. Thomas has demonstrated that he's willing to destroy you regardless of what you do. Our only choice is to attack first and hope we can do enough damage to protect you from retaliation. Friday morning arrived with the inexorable certainty of an execution date. Sarah dressed carefully in clothes that might be her last free choices, ate breakfast that tasted like cardboard, and tried to compose a letter to James that would explain why his sister had chosen to fight back rather than just survive. The FBI field office occupied a glass and steel building that looked like any other corporate tower, which seemed appropriate given that the crimes they were reporting involved the intersection of government and business corruption. Agent Jennifer Chen was younger than Sarah had expected, probably early 40s, with the kind of focused intensity that suggested she'd seen enough corporate criminals to recognize the real thing when she encountered it. Ms. Mitchell, Ms. Vasquez has briefed me on your situation. I want you to know that what you've uncovered represents one of the most sophisticated corporate conspiracy cases we've seen in the last decade. Agent Chen's voice carried the authority of someone who'd successfully prosecuted people much more powerful than Thomas Meridian III. Your recordings provide evidence of federal crimes that carry sentences of 10 to 20 years in prison. What about protection? Thomas has resources that... We're prepared to place you in protective custody immediately after the arrest. Operation. Your family will be relocated and provided with new identities if necessary. Agent Chen opened a file folder that contained more surveillance photographs than Sarah had expected. Ms. Mitchell, we've been investigating Webb Strategic Consulting for 8 months. Your evidence provides the final pieces we needed to move forward with arrests. The revelation hit Sarah like cold water. You already knew about the conspiracy? We knew parts of it. Webb Strategic's financial irregularities had attracted attention from multiple federal agencies, but we couldn't prove direct criminal activity until your recordings provided evidence of specific crimes being planned and executed. Agent Chen smiled with the satisfaction of someone whose patience had finally been rewarded. Today's handoff will be recorded by federal surveillance teams. Marcus Webb and Thomas Meridian III will both be arrested before they have any opportunity to retaliate against you. Sarah felt relief flooding through her for the first time in a week. So this is over? The immediate threat to you will be over after today's arrests. But, Ms. Mitchell, I need you to understand that testifying against a conspiracy this sophisticated will require months of depositions, court appearances, and potentially multiple trials. Agent Chen's expression grew more serious. These people have resources that extend far beyond what you've seen. Keeping you safe will require significant ongoing federal protection. Elena leaned forward, her voice carrying the concern of someone who'd become genuinely invested in Sarah's survival. What about her family? Her brother's medical school? Her mother's treatments? Witness protection includes provisions for family support and relocation assistance. James will be able to complete his medical education, and Carol's medical care will be covered by federal programs. Agent Chen closed the file folder, her tone shifting to something more personal. Ms. Mitchell, what you're doing requires more courage than most people possess. Exposing corruption at this level takes someone willing to risk everything for the possibility that justice might actually prevail. At 10:47 a.m., Sarah drove to the handoff location Marcus had specified, a parking garage near the airport that provided multiple exit routes and minimal surveillance. Federal agents were positioned throughout the structure, their presence invisible, but reassuring. Sarah carried a manila envelope containing the Phoenix intelligence that David had prepared. Technical specifications that sounded impressive, but would actually mislead any competitor foolish enough to use them. Marcus was waiting near the elevator, his usual corporate confidence replaced by something approaching nervousness. He'd probably been warned by Thomas that federal investigation was a possibility, though he clearly didn't understand how much evidence had already been gathered against him. Ms. Mitchell, right on time. I appreciate punctuality in business relationships. Marcus's smile felt forced, lacking the predatory confidence that had characterized their previous interactions. I trust you have the Phoenix intelligence package. We discussed everything you requested. Sarah handed him the envelope, her recording device capturing his acceptance of stolen corporate secrets. The federal crime that would justify his arrest. Technical specifications, competitive analysis, timeline projections. Everything needed to understand Phoenix's vulnerabilities. Marcus opened the envelope and quickly reviewed the contents, his expression growing more satisfied as he recognized technical details that appeared comprehensive and valuable. Excellent work, Ms. Mitchell. This represents exactly the kind of intelligence our clients pay premium rates to obtain. And my payment? Of course. Marcus handed her a cashier's check for $50,000, the remainder of her consulting fee and the final piece of evidence federal investigators needed to prove financial incentives for corporate espionage. It's been a pleasure working with someone who understands the practical realities of corporate survival. As Marcus turned to leave, federal agents emerged from positions throughout the parking garage, their badges and weapons clearly visible, as they surrounded him with the professional efficiency of people who'd executed similar operations dozens of times. Marcus Webb, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit corporate espionage, violation of federal trade secret laws, and conspiracy to commit fraud. Agent Chen's voice echoed through the concrete structure as handcuffs were applied. You have the right to remain silent. Sarah watched Marcus's arrest with a mixture of satisfaction and terror, knowing that Thomas Meridian III was being arrested simultaneously in his corporate office by a separate team of federal agents. The conspiracy that had destroyed her life was finally being exposed, but she also understood that today's arrests were just the beginning of a legal process that might take years to resolve. Her phone buzzed with a text from Elena. Thomas arrested at 10:52 a.m. Webb Strategic Consulting offices raided simultaneously, evidence seized from 17 different locations. You did it, Sarah. You actually did it. As federal agents escorted her to a secure location for debriefing, Sarah felt the weight of the last week finally lifting from her shoulders. She'd chosen to fight back against people who'd underestimated her intelligence and overestimated their own power. The cost had been enormous: her career, her financial security, her family's privacy. But the alternative would have been the slow destruction of everything she'd ever believed about herself. James would complete medical school under a new identity in a different state. Carol would receive the medical treatment she needed through federal witness protection programs. And Sarah would spend the next year testifying against corporate criminals who'd learned too late that some people couldn't be bought, broken, or manipulated into submission. The parking garage fell silent except for the echo of footsteps and the distant sound of traffic. Ordinary life continuing while extraordinary justice finally caught up with people who'd thought themselves untouchable. Sarah Mitchell's badge beeped against the turnstile at exactly 7:47 a.m., the same time it had every Tuesday for the past 9 years. The familiar rhythm of corporate routine wrapped around her like a comfortable blanket. Elevator to the 14th floor, left turn past the water cooler where Jenkins from accounting always lingered with yesterday's sports scores. Straight. Shot to her corner office overlooking the parking lot where her Honda Civic sat in space 247. She'd earned that corner office. Clawed her way up from intern to marketing director, one campaign at a time, one late night at a time, one sacrificed weekend at a time. The wall behind her desk displayed the evidence: framed awards for the Morrison account, the breakthrough campaign that saved 3 jobs during the 2019 downturn, the customer satisfaction metrics that had climbed steadily under her leadership. Her coffee was still steaming when her phone buzzed. Sarah, could you swing by conference room B? Nothing urgent. David Kim's voice carried that particular corporate casualness that meant everything except what it said. Conference room B. The glass-walled fishbowl where quarterly reviews happened, where promotions were announced, where bad news was delivered with strategic sympathy. Sarah glanced at her calendar. Nothing scheduled until the Phoenix campaign review at 10. Her stomach tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the morning coffee. Sure, David. On my way. The walk down the hallway felt longer than usual. Colleagues glanced up from their desks, offered their standard morning nods, then looked away too quickly. Later, she would remember those averted eyes and understand what they meant. But in the moment, she attributed the strange energy to her own nervousness about nothing. David sat at the far end of the conference table, his usually neat tie slightly askew. Beside him, Patricia Hernandez from HR shuffled through a manila folder with the careful attention of someone handling evidence. The sight of that folder, thick with papers, official-looking, sent ice through Sarah's veins. Sarah, please sit down. Patricia's voice carried the practiced sympathy of someone who had delivered this speech before. Many times before. Sarah remained standing. What's this about? David cleared his throat, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere past her left shoulder. Sarah, you know how much I value your contributions to this team. Your work on the Morrison account was exceptional, and the Phoenix project has really benefited from your insights. The past tense hung in the air like smoke. However, Patricia continued seamlessly, the company has made some strategic decisions about realignment moving forward. We're restructuring to better position ourselves for the challenges of the next fiscal quarter. Strategic decisions, realignment, restructuring. The words were corporate origami, folding harsh reality into acceptable shapes. Sarah's analytical mind, the same mind that had dissected market trends and consumer behavior for nearly a decade, began parsing the euphemisms with cold precision. You're firing me. David flinched as if she'd slapped him. Sarah, it's not. You're firing me, she repeated, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her chest. After 9 years, after the Morrison account, after Phoenix. Patricia slid a packet across the table. Your severance package reflects your years of service and... How much? Sarah's practical nature surfaced through the shock like a life preserver. She needed numbers, facts, something solid to hold on to while her world shifted beneath her feet. 6 weeks' salary, plus accumulated vacation time. Given the current budget constraints, 6 weeks. Sarah's mental calculator, honed by years of managing her family's finances, began its grim arithmetic. Mortgage, $2,400. Mom's medications, $800. James's tuition payment, $4,200, due in 3 weeks. Car payment, insurance, groceries, utilities. The numbers cascaded through her mind like falling dominoes. There's also information about COBRA benefits and career transition services, Patricia added, her voice growing softer as she read the devastation on Sarah's face. David finally met her eyes. Sarah, I want you to know that this decision came from above, way above. If it were up to me. But it's not, is it? Sarah's voice carried a bitter edge she didn't recognize. It never is. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the distant hum of office life continuing beyond the glass walls. People walking past, carrying coffee, discussing deadlines, living their Tuesday morning routines in blissful ignorance of the fact that Sarah Mitchell's carefully constructed world was collapsing in Conference Room B. I'll need you to clear out your office by end of business today, Patricia said gently. Security will escort you out, but it's just protocol. Nothing personal. Nothing personal. As if 9 years of her life, 9 years of 60-hour weeks and missed family dinners and presentations crafted in the quiet hours before dawn could be reduced to protocol. 20 minutes later, Sarah stood in her office, former office, staring at the personal items that had made this sterile space feel like home. The photo of James at his medical school graduation, the small succulent her mother had given her, somehow thriving under fluorescent lights. The coffee mug from the company retreat in Branson, back when team building felt genuine rather than performative. Her hands moved automatically, placing items in the cardboard box security had provided. Around her, colleagues passed by her doorway with studied casualness, their discomfort palpable. Rebecca Martinez paused at the threshold, her face a mixture of relief and guilt. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea this was coming. None of us did. Sarah sealed the box with packing tape, the ripping sound unnaturally loud. Take care of yourself, Rebecca. The words carried weight they both understood. Take care of yourself, because no one else will. The drive home blurred past in a haze of familiar landmarks that suddenly felt foreign. Stop signs she'd passed thousands of times. The coffee shop, where she'd grabbed lunch during particularly brutal deadline weeks. The dry cleaner where she'd picked up the suit she'd worn to her last promotion meeting. Her phone buzzed as she pulled into her driveway. Mom calling for their usual Tuesday check-in, the weekly ritual that kept their small family connected across the miles of their separate lives. Sarah stared at the phone until it stopped ringing. Then she sat in her car, cardboard box in the passenger seat, and tried to figure out how to tell the people who counted on her that she had nothing left to give. The silence stretched on, broken, only by the tick of the cooling engine and the distant sound of her neighbor's lawnmower. Somewhere in that ordinary suburban quiet, her phone began to ring again. Unknown number, unknown caller, unknown future opening like a door she wasn't sure she wanted to walk through. But she answered anyway, because what else was there left to lose? Ms. Mitchell. The voice was smooth, cultured, with just enough warmth to feel genuine. This is Marcus Webb. I imagine today has been rather difficult for you. Sarah's hand tightened on the phone. I'm sorry. Who is this? Someone who understands exactly what you're going through. The shock, the betrayal, the sudden realization that 9 years of loyalty means nothing when spreadsheets need balancing. His tone carried the weight of personal experience. I was wondering if you might have time for coffee. There's something I'd like to discuss that could be mutually beneficial. I don't understand. How did you get my number? Professional networks have a way of intersecting, Ms. Mitchell, especially when someone with your reputation suddenly becomes available. A pause, carefully timed. I'm at Grind Coffee on Maple Street. The corner booth. I'll be here for the next hour if you're interested in hearing about an opportunity that might help with some of the financial pressures you're undoubtedly calculating right now. The line went dead before Sarah could respond. She sat in her driveway, staring at the phone screen. The rational part of her mind, the part trained by 9 years of corporate caution, screamed warnings. Unknown caller, suspicious timing, knowledge he shouldn't possess. But the practical part, the part already drowning in mental arithmetic of bills and payments and dwindling savings, whispered a different message. What if this was the lifeline she needed? Grind Coffee occupied the corner of a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax preparation service that had been closed since April. Sarah had driven past it thousands of times but never stopped. It was the kind of place that survived on location rather than ambiance. Fluorescent lighting, mismatched furniture, and the persistent smell of over-roasted beans. She spotted him immediately. Mid-40s, impeccably dressed in a way that suggested success without ostentation. His suit was well-tailored but not flashy, his watch expensive but understated. He looked up from his tablet as she approached, offering a smile that managed to be both sympathetic and confident. Ms. Mitchell, Marcus Webb. He stood and extended his hand. His grip was firm without being aggressive, the handshake of someone comfortable with authority. Thank you for coming. Please, sit. Sarah slid into the booth across from him, her eyes automatically cataloging details. Manicured nails, no wedding ring, laptop bag that cost more than her monthly car payment. Everything about him spoke of a man who had landed on his feet after whatever fall had brought him here. You know, I sat in a very similar place 5 years ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying just the right note of shared pain. Conference room, HR representative, the whole corporate theater of it's not personal, it's business. Except when it's your life they're dismantling, it feels pretty damn personal. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.